When my solar panels sparked a showdown with the relentless HOA, I discovered that fighting for my rights might just lead to a battle against the very neighbors I'd once trusted. As my heart raced faster than a caffeinated squirrel, Geri's eyes narrowed, like laser beams focused on the offending solar panels. "Maya Thompson," she exclaimed, reference perfecting her disdain like an artist refining a masterpiece. "You cannot possibly believe those. Those contraptions fit the community's aesthetic. It's a visual offense." I blinked at her, convinced she had confused my green investment with a neon sign advertising a circus coming to town. Then again, in Geri's world, anything that deviated from her pristine vision of neighborhood perfection was akin to graffiti on the Sistine Chapel. I half expected her to whip out a thesaurus and declare war on the word insidious while standing amid my lovely solar cells. With a surge of righteous indignation, I countered, "Geri, climate change isn't concerned about aesthetics. My panels are the very definition of chic for Mother Earth." It sounded good in my head, but I could practically hear the crickets chirping at my brave yet preposterous attempt to spar with the HOA Hindenburg. Geri rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. Behind her, I caught glimpses of my baffled neighbors peeking out through their curtain slits, gripping their home-brewed coffee, as if it were the ultimate viewing party for a reality show gone terribly wrong. One glance at Tommy, who had taken a comfy perch on his porch, revealed a captivated grin. It felt akin to an Olympic event, and my performance just might win gold in the category of awkward homeowner confrontations. In desperation, I prepared to embark on a seemingly Herculean task, the HOA meeting later that week. Armed with an arsenal of eco-facts, renewable energy slogans, and a Pinterest board of solar panel designs, because sometimes you need visual aids, I transformed my cozy living space into a disaster zone of notes, pamphlets, and vague existential dread. As I gathered with Tommy in my kitchen, he fiddled with a new gadget while munching on some of my famous kale chips. I only half expected him to gag. My research took a turn. "Hey, Maya," he said with his mouth half full, "isn't there a new state mandate about supporting solar energy?" My nervous heart stopped for a moment. Interest tinged his voice. Code for, "Why didn't we just put the panels on a spaceship and send them to Mars?" After a frantic Google search that would haunt my search algorithm for eternity, I found the state mandate that made everyone's jaw drop, including mine. It mandated that homeowners had the right to install solar panels without the tyrannical oversight of a snooty HOA. I could almost hear a choir of angels tuning up for the grand reveal. Not only would the meeting entail much about governance and guidelines, but it was about to turn into a delightful display of Geri's incompetence, and I couldn't wait to savor the moment. I could practically taste the victory as I channeled my inner courtroom drama diva, preparing mentally for the perfect delivery of my solar defense. When the night of the meeting arrived, I strapped on my proverbial armor, a graphic tee that read, "The sun is my co-pilot," and a pair of my favorite, albeit comical, oversized jeans. The crowd gathered that evening came prepared for a raucous showdown. Geri stood cloaked in her waspish authority at the head of the table, looking like a matriarch preparing to defend her prize-winning hydrangeas. As she began her speech, laden with vague threats of community decency, I could see Tommy in the back, nodding vigorously, ready to lend moral support as my tech-savvy right-hand man. Finally, after listening to Geri's melodramatic tirade, she really could have taken up stage acting. I threw caution to the wind and stood up. "I hope y'all have your seatbelts buckled, because I'm about to take you on a roller coaster ride through state policy." And it came spiraling out in a cacophony of facts and figures. The room held its breath, hesitant to interject, as I unveiled my newfound ammunition. Thanks to our lovely state legislators, I'm legally entitled to have my solar panels, regardless of Geri's little visual offenses. So, Geri, how do you like that for community standards? The silence in the room was palpable, the suspense akin to holding your breath underwater just to see who would drown first. In a comical twist of fate, I watched as Geri's face turned an impressive shade of crimson. My neighbors erupted in cheers, exclaiming all manner of support, obviously desperate for a distraction from their boredom and reluctantly thrilled by my audacity. Victory whirled dangerously in the air, and with it, the undeniable idea that nothing could outshine a moment of karmic justice as I quietly imagined Geri fuming in her perfectly matched housecoat, flailing her arms in dramatic discontent. And just like that, each solar panel gleamed brighter against the oppressive clouds of entitlement, preparing to bask in their well-deserved triumph. What would Geri do next? The uproarious cheers of my neighbors faded into a blend of laughter and disbelief, while I fantasized about a deluge of solar-powered victory confetti. But it was regretful Geri, with her hawkish gaze slowly pivoting between me and the abominable binders of rules she had archived, who posed a significant part of this unfolding saga. As the radiant glimmer of triumph settled around me like the finest silk, I sensed the winds shifting. Geri's face had morphed from fiery crimson to an icy pallor. She looked like she might stage an elaborate feint right at the podium. I half expected her to whip out a list of enchantments and curses she had secretly concocted to hex my dear solar panels into oblivion. The tension crackled audibly as Geri composed herself, her tightly braided silver strands seemingly pulsing with unspent fury. She cleared her throat, a sound that forewarned of an impending hurricane of spitefulness. "You think this is over, Maya?" she squawked, the dubious authority in her voice reminiscent of a character ranting in a drama where everyone jumped off a cliff. "Let me remind you that not only do we uphold community standards, but we also have the ability to challenge your little mandate." It was brave of her to weave threats into the air like unwanted spider silk. I almost felt for her. It must be exhausting having one of those perpetual black clouds over your head, yearning for the sun while restrictions swirled like a cyclone around your beleaguered soul. What I hadn't anticipated, however, was the sight of my laid-back, cargo-shorted neighbor Tommy rising to defend me, armed with an arsenal of tech-savvy wisdom that would make even Google blush. "Geri, you really think the state would let you just march in and dissolve someone's own property rights?" he drawled, tossing in a modicum of ease, as if we were discussing picnic plans rather than the monumental clash unfolding right before our eyes. His delivery was like a cool summer breeze, breaking through a suffocating heatwave, ruffling the heavy drapes of Geri's prejudice. Cheers of solidarity echoed from the gathered throng, emboldened by Tommy's unexpected foray into the fight. I almost felt proud. Not only did my neighbor possess an uncanny ability to fix electronics, but now he was a knight in plaid armor. Driven by unadulterated popcorn-level suspense, the meeting pressed on and unfolded like a dubious episode of a legal drama. With Geri back on her feet, attempting to reclaim her demeanor, she tossed banalities and strong undertones of superiority as if it might somehow peel the layer of support I had garnered from my friends and neighbors. Little did she know I had not only armed myself with state mandates but now also gained traction through the camaraderie of the other homeowners. Tommy continued to play his support role wonderfully, occasionally adding comedic clarifications, such as, "Do we really wish to go toe-to-toe with state law?" And I could practically feel my neighbor's eye rolls turning into Olympic worthy eye rolls. The palpable camaraderie forged in these surreal moments made me realize just how absurd our lives had become. As the facade of power crumbled around her, Geri turned her shiny, authoritative hawk eyes on me with theatrical flair, sounding like an opera diva belting her finale. "Mark my words, Maya," she promised, each syllable drenched in menace as if she were reciting her own form of a bad Shakespearean curse. "What goes around will come around. You'll see." I couldn't help but chuckle. Geri underestimated the cyclical nature of karma, while simultaneously looking like a character doomed to be foiled. Not only had my panels secured their rightful place on my shimmering rooftop, but the entire narrative was beginning to pivot ever so slightly in my favor, like some cosmic scale asserting that equilibrium might just prevail amidst the petty chaos. As the night progressed into an energetic debate punctuated by potluck dishes in hand, I marveled at how witty repartee had morphed into the high drama of urban warfare. With every passing moment, Geri's rhetoric dwindled, her attempts at intimidation slowly melting away like ice cream on a hot summer day. What had started as an environmental skirmish had evolved into a communal battle for greener pastures, and suddenly, I had become the unwilling mascot of rebellion. Muffled giggles and whispered praise bubbled from my neighbors. Even the previously passive flock seemed roused to action, a delightful realization. Before long, we were brainstorming solar designs faster than Geri could delineate her stitching preferences, and their voices grew in sync with mine, creating a jubilant cacophony that hailed victory, one deck of solar panels at a time. As I danced amidst the revelry of victory, visualizing the gleaming panels basking in the sunshine above my home, I couldn't help but wonder about what Geri's next move might be. Surely, she wouldn't retreat without a fight. Would she gather support from the aloof homeowner who resided in the McMansion at the end of the road? Would she unleash her magnificent rainbow-hued pamphlets detailing the evils of solar panels? Whatever the future held, the memories of today's showdown would linger like the last drops of summer rain on thirsty soil, signaling the spirit of change had indeed arrived. What other absurdities awaited us in this ongoing saga? The meeting eventually sputtered to a halt, but Geri's indignant presence loomed over us like the final act in a bad high school play. As my neighbors began filtering out, their enthusiasm still crackling in the air, I could see the storm brewing behind Geri's tightly pressed lips. Every now and then, I'd catch her hawk-like eyes darting around, surveying the post-battle scene like a general contemplating the remains of her decimated forces. I could almost hear the cogs in her mind turning. Plotting her revenge didn't seem far-fetched. But at that moment, fueled with triumph and an exhilarating flush of camaraderie, I dismissed her theatrics, wrapping myself in the warmth of my neighborly enclave. We had just scored the first goal of this season's HOA Drama League. The day after our raucous meeting, I awoke to a rather peculiar concoction of emotions, mixing euphoria with something akin to dread that tickled my stomach like an overenthusiastic kid on a roller coaster. My phone buzzed incessantly, the screen lighting up with messages from my gang of supporters rallying around my cause. Apparently, Geri had been conjuring up a new prototype of community flyers targeted at diffusing the solar menace. Just like those zombie apocalypse pamphlets you'd see stacked in local coffee shops. Join us at the park for a family fun day. No solar panels allowed. Read the headline, which had been scribbled out like a toddler's hastily drafted novel. I couldn't help but chuckle. If Geri's punishment plan had a theme, it would clearly be desperate and dreadfully uncreative. Weeks passed, and each new encounter with Geri unfolded with comic absurdity, like a sitcom where the audience waited for the pivotal pumpkin carving scene. One moment, she could be seen clutching her elegant clipboard, which had undoubtedly been inherited from the Queen of Strict, ready to demand compliance over the silliest issues. And the next moment, she was squawking at my solar panels from across the street like a particularly grumpy parrot who just found out the neighbor had a better cage. It was an ever-present reminder of the quirky battle we found ourselves embroiled in. To my amusement, Geri's antics had moments of theatrical flair. There was one instance where she dressed head to toe in anti-solar attire at our neighborhood gathering, an ensemble spanning from shades so dark they could block out the sun to a t-shirt demanding "Don't be solar silly." If I hadn't been laughing so hard, I might have applauded her courage. Then one afternoon, as the sun painted the horizon with vibrant hues of gold and orange, my phone buzzed with exciting news. A group I'd reached out to, the local solar advocacy squadron, better known as the Shining Squad, had finally returned my frantic message of desperation and declared their intentions to host a community seminar right at our park. I could practically hear the angels sing. This was a golden opportunity. Geri, assuming her position as queen of negativity, would surely scoff at my newfound support. Quickly, I whipped up a bright poster board invitation that glimmered in the afternoon sun, detailing our impending Solar Awareness Day, which would feature fresh lemonade and enlightening talks, along with a special segment on how solar panels don't bite, a classic Geri myth I intended to demolish. When I introduced the invitation at the next HOA meeting, Geri's disdain was palpable. She crossed her arms as tightly as her plotted schedule. An event for solar panels? She sneered, a hint of incredulity in her voice. What a ridiculous use of our park for your solar propaganda." The laughter from my neighbors felt like a beautiful symphony in the background, underscoring Geri's futile attempts to maintain her authority in an ocean of merriment that had swiftly morphed into solar-fueled love. She looked like a disgruntled cat, uncertain whether to leap out of the window or stick around in a discontented huff. Tommy, ever the laid-back spirit of our quirky ensemble, supplied comic doses of enthusiasm, candidly exclaiming how he'd be sure to block a few chairs to give citizens their seats in the upcoming revolution of solar learning. The night prior to the big seminar, I had butterflies swirling in my stomach, nerves dancing like they'd just signed up for an amateur tap class. But as the sun filtered down through the park's trees on the fateful day, my anxious energy quickly transformed into unreserved anticipation. The crowd gathered around me, drooling over ice-cold lemonade, while swapping stories of solar installations gone awry and potential eco-friendly hacks. And oh, how the crowd grew! Word spread like wildfire, finding friends of friends who seemed more excited about this solar event than they had ever been about any food truck festival. The energy pulsated through the park, tart and electrifying. I realized I wasn't just defending my panels or even the environment. I was spearheading a nuclear energy shift, a grassroots movement against Geri's insatiable need to uphold concocted standards. Yet, amidst this colorful tapestry of laughter and camaraderie, a shadow loomed familiar, Geri, appearing just as I'd feared. With her perfectly manicured nails and wings of irritation spread wide, she ambled right into the heart of the seminar, her eyes darting wildly as amusement briefly flickered in her hawk-like gaze. She had arrived, undoubtedly ready to deliver a theatrical performance that would rival any Broadway show. But rather than freezing in fright, I felt an unfamiliar surge of confidence wash over me. Geri's presence only cemented the absurdity of the entire tableau. We had successfully flipped the HOA narrative on its head, and a sense of mischievousness bloomed within me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced with exaggerated flair, "I present to you our very own HOA president, purveyor of solar-soaked dread and architect of yesterday's community nightmares." I awoke the next morning, grinning at the delicious sense of irony. What fresh mischief awaited us with Geri's next move? The next day felt electric, charged with the kind of anticipation you experience before opening a gift you know has your name on it. I practically floated to the park, buoyed by the weight of yesterday's triumph, eager to see how Geri would repackage her indignation. The sun shone down brilliantly, creating a perfect backdrop for our community of newly minted solar advocates, who had sparked this lively revolution. Tommy, with a flair for the dramatics hardly befitting his plaid shirts, was already arranging makeshift chairs, while explaining to a neighbor why solar energy needed to be in everyone's lives like avocados on toast. I couldn't agree more. It felt like we were prepping for the coolest block party, but one that went beyond party hats and pinwheels. We were literally laying the groundwork for a brighter future, one roof at a time. When the crowd began trickling in, parents, single folks, and even Geri's most staunch supporters shuffled through, looking curious, yet slightly skeptical as they approached our solar circus, the playful name we'd decided to call the event. I greeted everyone with enthusiasm, hopping from person to person like a kid on a playground, arms waving as I dished out tickets for lemonade and informative pamphlets that painstakingly rebutted every Geri-inspired myth about solar panels. I'd even crafted a fun PowerPoint presentation that illustrated the undeniable benefits of solar energy, complete with more charts than any sane person would consider. I mean, who wouldn't want to see a pie chart of their potential savings? Honestly, charts can be love letters for data nerds. And there she was, Geri, slipping into the park as if she had emerged from a secret lair built from the regulations she swore to uphold. She glided to the center, like an osprey, descending onto its unsuspecting prey. With her hawkish gaze narrowed and clipboard clutched tightly like a life buoy, she scanned the sea of cheerful faces brought together by lemonade and enlightenment, her expression a delightful blend of frustration and unrelenting determination. The best part? From where I was standing, she appeared utterly petrified. You could almost see the gears grinding inside her head as she calculated how best to steer this ship back toward the rocky shores of HOA misery. It was a sight worthy of popcorn. Before she could add another dramatic twist to the narrative, I felt a sudden surge of courage. If Geri had decided this was about community standards, then I would flip her defining of standards right back into the realm of laughter. As she began her protest with a speech about why solar panels would ruin our architectural homogeneity, I interrupted her with hand gestures that spread across the makeshift gathering. "Join me, everyone, in making noise at the mention of solar panels," I declared, and the crowd erupted with applause, whistles, and laughter. Geri's face contorted, shifting from indignation to disbelief. It must have felt surreal to her, like stepping into a carnival after years of attending only funeral wakes. Every time she tried to gain the upper hand, we countered with humor. Someone in the front yelled, "Does solar power make you less grumpy?" causing roars of laughter and leaving her desperately sputtering to reclaim her authority. It was vindication on a silver platter, and although she tried to play it cool, I could see her frustration turning incandescent, which felt like the cosmic payback I had been waiting for. Tommy, all too delighted by the spectacle, leaned into the crowd, whispering about how this might just be better than watching sitcom reruns. Anyone with enough common sense to check Geri's ardor already knew the punchline. Her authoritarian reign was being wittily dismantled by her own community. By the time it came to the grand finale, my empowering presentation, Geri was practically balancing on her tippy toes, her clipboard shaking slightly from the tension, coiling within her like a tightly wound spring. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Solar Awareness Day. Today, not only will we learn how to lower our bills, but we'll also explore how solar panels can harmonize with your home, much like a well-chosen playlist smooths out a road trip's vibes. I expressed, basking in the rapt attention of my audience. The chart I had created uniquely illustrated how sunbeams could be harnessed to save us money, as delightful a revelation as the discovery of magic socks that never get lost in the dryer. As I concluded my presentation and prepared to proudly gather my lemonade from the cooler for celebratory sipping, the sound of applause grew thunderous, drowning out any lingering whispers of dissent. Geri was left standing like a statue after a war, the winds of discontent surrounding her and her clipboard, almost in mocking reverie. At last, she couldn't bear the atmosphere any longer and stormed out of the park, a whirlwind of crisply ironed rebellion. A part of me wondered if she'd stumbled into a secret meeting of the Liberal Conspiracy for Cheaper Electricity, or maybe a sorority dedicated to crochet, anything other than the solar coven now blooming in the park. As euphoria swept through our group, in that moment, I felt completely validated. Perhaps we'd developed a community that could breathe together, standing against the last vestiges of Geri's so-called tyranny. Clinking lemonade cups together, we toasted to days ahead, days where our roofs could harvest sunshine unopposed, where laughter would ring louder than the grumblings of some misplaced HOA commander. But as I saw Geri's exaggerated flounce on her way out, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for her to regroup her forces for the next round of her HOA crusade. Was this just a temporary victory, or would my silly little solar revolution usher in a new wave of community empowerment? One thing was for sure, we would always be ready. After our Solar Awareness Day triumph, I felt a rush of energy that no amount of caffeine could replicate. Every day, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors eager to share photos of their own solar consultations or quirky memes about solar energy, my personal favorite being one that featured a cartoon sun wearing sunglasses and holding a banner reading, "I'm here to save your wallet." As the days flew by, it became evident that Geri's attempts to squash my solar revolution primarily involved complaining to anyone who would listen about how the aesthetic integrity of our community was in ruin, and how her exclusive rules had been mangled into a solar circus. Yet miraculously, our neighborhood's ensemble seemed to be thriving on this newfound energy, unearthing a collective enthusiasm for ecological awareness that would rival even the most avid environmentalist's dream. One wonderfully chaotic Saturday afternoon, I found myself knee-deep in planning a neighborhood potluck, a cunning stratagem to gather and strengthen our ranks against Geri's impending revenge. I envisioned a masterful evening, a veritable buffet of delicious dishes prepared by husband and wife teams, championing the hybrid power of local produce and solar energy. My kitchen filled with eco-flavored chaos. Chopped veggies danced off the cutting board, while my jumbled flat screen showcased a streaming tutorial on solar panel maintenance. You can be both a functional chef and renewable energy warrior, I mumbled to myself as I fumbled with the blender's cord, half convinced Geri would storm through my front door at any moment to chastise me for this friendly assembly. Only then did my phone buzz with a reminder of the next HOA meeting. An urgent finesse in public speaking was starting to take shape in my mind like rising dough. Later that evening at the potluck, dishes lined tables like artists' supplies, awaiting a masterpiece of flavors to flourish. Tommy, ever the local techno whiz, set up an extravagant solar-powered string light display, illuminating our gathering. Sustainable chic at its finest, he declared, adjusting the cool blue lights above the captivated crowd. Over glowing bowls of organic guacamole and kale salad, our conversations danced from politics to the merits of green energy. I delighted in seeing Geri's old adversaries, folks who'd once tiptoed around her iron grip, unraveling their frustrations and pledging to empower our sustainable movement. As we feasted and laughed, I shared news of the upcoming HOA meeting on Tuesday, where we had the opportunity to voice our collective opinions against Geri's dogged attempts to establish the Anti-Solar Panel League. My steady resolve and the group's momentum transformed the palpable tension into something lighter. Picture it, Geri, strutting in with clipboard in hand, only to find a battalion of determined homeowners fully prepared to drain all her authority while armed with facts and delicious food. The table erupted with laughter. Someone jokingly quipped that if Geri tried to stop us, she'd be met with a pasta salad of power. Who knew the culinary arts could be so motivational? Eventually, the evening's laughter settled, and our boisterous chatter transformed into impassioned discussions about how each participant could use their voice to advocate passionately for solar rights. Tommy suggested that I prepare some speeches too, but I smugly assured the group my charisma could do the trick alone. We all agreed. Geri might have her title, but we had numbers and, apparently, a potluck worthy of the gods. We raised our glasses to the week ahead, visions of triumph starting to paint themselves like lingering pastel hues in a sunset sky. Sure, I may have been a bit smug, but wasn't a little bit of bravado okay after such a victory? As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. I replayed moments from past encounters with Geri in my mind, reconciling the petty frustrations of our one-time squabbles. In doing so, I discovered a kernel of empathy. Could she have been hiding under that manic planner exterior, struggling to safeguard what she held dear? Regardless, as the night wrapped up, a stirring determination settled in my heart. Geri may have seen this revolution as an act of defiance, but I wanted her to understand that it was about exploring possibilities. If she could see the light, perhaps the battle could morph into a collaborative effort. Naturally, Tuesday arrived, and with it a strong sense of anticipation, shadowed by a slight edge of fear. Armed with my notebook filled with mantra, like quotes from fellow solar advocates, and a few inspired doodles, I marched into the HOA meeting like a valiant knight prepared for an epic showdown. Geri sat at the head of the table, her piercing eyes scanning each member of the audience who appeared far more enthusiastic than I had ever seen them. Perhaps guilt from merely participating in her strict protocols caught up with them? Her hawkish demeanor faltered, and for a moment, I couldn't help but think, is she finally cracking? With the support of my neighbors swelling behind me, I took a deep breath, ready to shine brighter than any solar panel could dream. Would we finally capture both the sun's energy and her attention in this momentous meeting? The atmosphere buzzed with an almost electric anticipation as the HOA meeting kicked off. I felt a curious blend of excitement and nausea curling in my stomach like an ominous tornado. Geri sat at the head of the table, her tightly wound demeanor exuding authority and disdain in equal parts. The other board members, usually nodding willingly to her every decree, shifted in their seats as they caught the glimmer of rebellion flickering in my determined eyes. This wasn't just another meeting. It was the moment our collective voices would harmonize into a choir of defiance against the impending shadow of her draconian rules. It felt as thrilling as a reality TV show, except there wouldn't be any dramatic confessional cutaways. And alas, no mascara to stream down my cheeks. Thank goodness for small favors. With a cough that made me sound a little more authoritative than I felt, I rose to the podium with my recycled paper notes close to my chest. The first few moments were shaky, like a fledgling bird forced out of a tree, but the sea of supportive faces buoyed my resolve. I kicked things off by sharing the astounding statistics I'd gathered about solar energy's benefits, not only for the environment, but for our wallets too. Did you know, I squeaked, that homeowners with solar panels increase their property values by an average of 1%? That's a lot of brownie points on your final sale, Geri, assuming you ever decide to put those flower beds to good use and spring for a neighborly move. The scattered chuckles gave me just the right boost to unleash a carefully crafted line about Geri's ferocious adherence to aesthetics. And we all know how heart-wrenchingly beautiful a suburban cookie-cutter home looks next to a sun-kissed panel. Is it really blocking property values, Geri? Or just your vision board needing an update? I glanced sideways briefly to Tommy, who wore a smug grin that almost prompted me to high-five him mid-speech. The room was alive with whispers of support. My crime against decorum was being met with chuckles and nods of agreement. Geri's hawkish eyes blazed with indignation, but the cracks in her armor widened. It was like watching a gremlin scowling at the dawn. She was losing ground as the room became an arena of enthusiasm. Now, let us not forget the actual law protecting our right to install these delightful sun-absorbing panels, I continued, presenting a copy of the state mandate with a flourish reminiscent of a magician revealing their best trick. The California Solar Rights Act is like that friend who lifts you up when you're down, saying, "You're fabulous. Go shine your light, honey." Unless, of course, you're Geri, in which case the act is more of a no and never ever. From the back of the room, a brave neighbor named Linda shouted, "We want the sun. And those panels, too. No one's asking Geri to ruin her garden." The laughter escalated into a full chorus of support, as if we were at an old-school rock concert, chanting a rebellious anthem giddy with the promise of a favorable outcome. I saw Geri's lashes flutter like a startled hummingbird, and it was clear she was losing her grip. The board members exchanged worried glances, as if considering whether calling security would be more appropriate than providing the community with the sunlight we all suddenly craved. I seized the moment, my voice rising with confidence. Let's demand our rights. What's next, Geri? Banning wind chimes because they disrupt the peaceful ambiance of your precious gardens? With momentum and energy swirling in the room like swirling autumn leaves, I imagine I could almost hear the distant sound of victory bells chiming. But then, just as I began preparing to issue my boldest point, Geri sprung to her feet like a taut rubber band ready to snap at any second. "Maya," she interjected, her hawkish gaze targeting me like a sniper's bullet. "This isn't just about solar panels. It's about maintaining the quality of our community." I smiled graciously, really harnessing my inner zen as I straightforwardly corrected her. "And forgive me for asking, but what's quality without diversity? Besides, I'd argue it's a little unjust to act as the judge of what constitutes quality when your prized garden looks like it lost a fight with a raccoon." The room erupted like a volcano, a delicious eruption of laughter and support for my solar-flavored jabs. Geri's face drained of color, existing somewhere between an inferno and a mild shade of mauve. Oh, how I reveled in this! Maybe she was like a deer caught in headlights, but more like a howling wolf who suddenly discovered she was surrounded by sheep donning solar capes. For a fleeting moment, I felt a rush of empathy for her, but clearly, the time for feeling sorry for Geri was non-existent when her reign was hanging by the thinnest of threads. I delivered one final heartfelt line. This isn't just a fight about solar panels. This is about coming together as a community and figuring out how to coexist. So let's let the sun shine in. The applause was thunderous, fueled by the fiery spirit unleashed in that cramped conference room. Geri's expression was a masterpiece of disdain mixed with disbelief, her dreams of hierarchical control spiraling like autumn leaves swirling in a gust of wind. I tilted my chin up triumphantly, picturing the headlines my battle might produce. Local OO overthrown in bid for solar equality. Or something just as glorious and poetic. Little did I know, Geri still had a few tricks up her sleeve. What would happen next in our saga of solar righteousness? Would she launch a final, desperate counterattack? I took a moment to savor the laughter echoing around me, but if there was anything I learned about HOA battles, it was that tragedy and comedy were never far apart in our shared plot. What would she do next to counter this spark of rebellion? The clamor of approval echoed in the hall, but my heart raced like it was auditioning for the next big reality show. I stood basking in the glow of the moment, feeling as if I'd just won an Oscar for the category of Best Dramatic Display of Solar Power Advocacy. However, before I could finish waving to my imaginary crowd, Geri unleashed her fury like a volcano set to erupt. "You think this is funny, Maya?" Her voice, sharp enough to slice through the raucous laughter, threatened to turn the jubilant atmosphere into one of dread, like a poorly timed sitcom punchline. "I've built this community's identity. I won't allow your solar spouting antics to ruin it." Tommy, handling his dad-like instinct to diffuse the tension, leaned closer to me, whispering, "This is the part where we need to crank up the laughter. Let's make this a comedy show." As if on cue, I decided to throw caution and good taste to the wind. "Geri, sweetie," I began, forcing an exaggerated smile, "if being a queen of the HOA means reigning in sunlight, maybe it's time to invest in some sunglasses." Geri's eyes nearly rolled back into her tightly coiled bun as the laughter rippled through the crowd, morphing her fuming demeanor into something closer to a vibrant tomato red. The room shifted again, its pulse overtaken by camaraderie, crackling like fresh static after a rainstorm, bonded under our shared disdain for her pompous authority. Now, you might wonder where all this might lead. It wasn't just about the sun-kissed panels any longer. It was about the thrill of triumph against a notorious HOA regime, one governed by whims and restrictive garden gnomes. But Geri's hawkish eyes, glimmering with indignation, informed me she was far from defeated. With a flourish I could only assume was intentional, she composed herself, her tightly wound demeanor seemingly packing more tension than an overcooked spaghetti noodle. "This isn't over," she declared, wielding her voice like an ancient weapon. "You'll see how these solar decorations turn out." For a moment the room froze, as every attendee collectively held their breath, waiting. The silence was punctuated only by the subdued clinks of my reusable water bottle, echoing a kind of ominous fate ahead. As Geri scrambled to gather her thoughts, I felt the window of opportunity widening, as if I could almost taste victory, ripen infuriatingly sweet, upon my tongue. "Oh, what's the matter?" I shot back, suppressing a grin as Geri glared at me. "They even make solar panels in fashionable colors now. Maybe we could accessorize with your beloved garden." The room erupted again, laughter spilling like a vibrant flood, turning my little speech into a community event rather than just my solo performance. It was becoming increasingly clear that Geri's reign, much like her floral arrangements, was wilting right under the sunlight of our collective support. My loyal comrades shifted in their seats, the tide turning ever so slightly in our favor. In a sudden twist characteristic of her usual drama, Geri whipped out a hastily written statement of rules, or at least it seemed hastily written to anyone who wasn't her. "I'm invoking the emergency provision of our HOA by laws," she proclaimed, "which states that any exterior modifications must be approved by a special committee. Hence, your solar panels won't just be making your house look unsightly, they will also be delayed indefinitely." Gasps echoed throughout the crowd. How delightfully ironic. It was like a cat tangled in yarn trying to make a grand escape but failing miserably and leaving everyone in stitches. State law or not, the sheer audacity of her statement could only be rivaled by the boldness of those oversized floral prints she insisted on parading around. Choosing that precise moment to capitalize on her ridiculousness, I leaned forward. "Absolutely, Geri. We wouldn't want our community to be ravaged by unsightly sun sponges, would we? Maybe we should start a committee to keep those horrid colors in check too. The laughter spilled into the hall, uproariously taming the overbearing echo of her draconian claims. Her expression moved from outrage to a distinct shade of political vulnerability, which, mind you, never looked so delicious on someone who thrived on control. It was one of those moments where the drama was fueled not only by rebellion, but also by the sheer bliss of getting under the skin of someone known for clenching tightly onto the reins. For what felt like an eternity, Geri fluctuated between disbelief and indignation, but then, shockingly, she backed down. With all the grace of a toddler having been denied ice cream, she threw up her hands and retreated like a wounded bird, vowing she would speak with higher authorities. Everyone burst into applause that rang for the victory I'd earned for us all. Several neighbors began chatting enthusiastically about how they'd been thinking of installing panels themselves, their spirits lifted with the power of the sun backing us, more determined than ever to conquer Geri's reign of harnessed sunlight. My heart swelled with joy as I reveled in this unexpected turn, and just like that, the meeting transformed from a mundane HOA gathering into an enchanting testament to community strength. My fellow neighbors hovered around me, buzzing with excitement, launching into a brainstorming session for ways to move forward. As laughter and ideas circulated, I decided to unveil my pièce de résistance, a rectangular box nestled snug in my bag. I'm so glad you're all here in this victorious hour to share a piece of cake so bright it could blind Geri. I pulled out the cake adorned with the words, "Solar Power for All," and as we indulged, I captured a moment of sheer joy and unity. Just like my love for renewable energy, this fight had transformed me. It had lit within us the spark needed to challenge normative thinking and shake off the carefully controlled lens through which we had allowed ourselves to view our community. As the crumbs of defeat settled under Geri's carefully manicured feet, I couldn't help but reflect. With a little courage, humor, and cake, maybe we really could pave a path to a brighter tomorrow. Would Geri ever be able to block out the sun again? We'd know soon enough,